Today is kind of like a PSA on screen comps. I have recently completed a job where we had quite a few screen comps, nothing too crazy, kind of very similar to something like this, where maybe the phone wasn't shot with checking tracking markers. There was definitely some interaction, and it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't crazy. So kind of bread and butter of compositors, flame artists, nuke artists, whomever. And so I was surprised when I kept getting some tracks back and some screen comps back that were less than perfect for what I thought were very simple shots to kind of complete in a given amount of time. So I wanted to unpack that with you because I think moving forward, it's important to know that uh, these buttons do matter in some of the steps and operations that people take, or shortcuts that they think they are doing. Have consequences, especially if you're turning into a supervisor or have people looking at some of these things under a microscope, which is what happens occasionally. So I want to kind of go through what happened and how to fix it and how to avoid doing it in the future. So I'm going to kind of recreate the steps. I'm not going to do the occlusion tracking, but just know what you need to do for any, probably whether you're in Mocha or wherever you are. Definitely occlude anything that's covering the screen and that you don't want to be included in the tracking. So that would very much apply here, and you will not get a good result without doing that. To show you quickly what you should do to set that up, it's really just as simple as taking a garbage mask, kind of creating your shape, and then whether by hand or by planar or 1-point track, you just want to make sure you're able to kind of set a boundary. You want to be as close to the shape as possible without cutting into it, and you don't want to be so wide that you're going to omit precious screen information that might be used in the tracking. So this is kind of what I would do. I would just kind of get a 1-point track, kind of analyze it, let it drift off is fine because I just kind of need the general location of everything. I'll set this as our starting frame, and then I would just manually go and go through it. I'd probably use the edit box, Control E right here, and just start to nudge this thing into position along the way, do some general keyframes, and then get a little bit more granular my second time through as I need to kind of get it into a better position. So that would kind of be the general rule. I can help out any time you need with more context on that if you're interested. But I did both sides because this left hand is also going to cover the screen, and that's going to cause a problem. So I have 2 garbage masks, totally fine. It's exactly what we want. And then the way that this person did it, and again, most of the steps are fine, but they did miss some crucial points along the way, and that did cause some huge problems for us. But let's just go ahead and show you what I would consider the wrong way based upon what results we got. If it works for you, I'm not here to say otherwise, but I think you do have to work harder to get it, and I think there's easier ways, and I'm all about that. So we have our axis. I'm going to go to tracking. It's a planar track. We're going to track the background layer. We're going to treat this as a perspective surface, and we're going to track backwards. I'm going to snap it, and you'll see the screen. We're not occluding anything yet. I need to turn on the media G mask to be excluded. So now when I hit snap, we're removing parts of the solve, which is our garbage mask that we did over here. So that's the general setup here. One thing that this particular artist had on, which is the big no-no in this case, is they had auto update reference on. And if you've seen other videos of mine talking about tracking, you'll know that this is a problem because it's going to set a new reference frame on every frame. So as this kind of image starts to drift, it's going to always look for a new snap location, and it's going to end up being quite different than where you started. What you really wanted to do is kind of take a snapshot at first and always look for that first snapshot as best you can. You might have to snap along the way, but you want to be in control of that. You don't necessarily want it to do it for you on these screen comps or in simple situations where you know you kind of just have a phone and it's moving and drifting and but otherwise looks like it should give a good solve. So we're going to keep auto update reference on. We're going to snap. We got the occlusion already, and then we're just going to track this. And what you're going to see is, like, on first glance, you're going to be like, oh, that track looks like pretty good. I think I can work with that. However, this is the first part of the gotchas. I made a grid just so we can look at it. And actually, why don't we just make this grid more like I know this isn't quite the iPhone resolution, but let's at least make it like a vertical phone. So what I would start to do is you're gonna, attach this under your track. You're gonna hide this, hide your garbage mask, let's say, and I can start to scale down. I can maybe make it a perspective surface or bilinear or whatever the case. I want to be able to see what's going on. So I'm gonna set up just kind of a little bit of a check for myself. So I'm gonna keep the screen off, and I just want to use the bounding box as a guide just to see how I'm looking. So that'll be probably the only way I can really check the track, because that's the second problem is under this way, if I go ahead and just invert this axis, it's not going to give me necessarily what I want. It's not going to show me the stabilized phone as it will in the perspective grid, and it's going to not really be truly telling if my track is working for me or not, like what happens in the perspective grid, which we'll get to. So again, just going under this method, I'm gonna have auto key on. I'm just gonna kind of now start looking at the track just to see if there's any issues, see if it holds up. I can see that it does a pretty good job for the most part, and that's pretty good, but where I'm gonna struggle is probably in some of the areas where it couldn't quite see the screen that well. Let's see if this, or just in general, I can see that we do have a little bit of drift here, and what I would end up starting to do is starting to correct that, which could be the start of my problem, because some of what I saw from this artist was pretty minor, but one of the issues was we couldn't quite stabilize it out to test, and that became a problem. When I asked for that test, you can see it maybe is off a little bit here, it was something that they weren't able to do and didn't know how to kind of execute, and so that became a huge problem for us to be able to test the validity of the track itself. So regardless if this method worked today, I would argue if you're going to go down this route, to at least turn off auto update reference. So let's just duplicate this, and we are going to do the same track. I'll hide our grid, return back on all our masks, so it's the exact same setup. The only difference right now is we are going to turn off the auto update reference. I'm going to hit snap, and we'll just to kind of clear it all out. Snap, same exact setup outside of that. And now we're going to do the same track. I'm going to turn our grid back on and hide everything else just to see if there's any real difference here, if it's any tighter. So let's go ahead and we'll just keep this last one so we have no more keyframes. And let's just kind of see what happens. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. Okay. So now the goal is, do we see a more solid track? And let's see, we had, I mean, I would have to test the two, but I think the short answer is going to be yes, just from having done this a few times now. And I think that's, at the very least, that's where I think you want to be if you're going to use a planar track with a garbage mask and without using the perspective grid. But again, the shortcoming is that you can't really stabilize it out to test fully if the track is working and whatever kind of micro movements you're getting. So that brings me to the very thing that led to the issue in the first place. So this artist, like I said, was not using the perspective grid, so there was no way to truly invert outside of doing some like 2-point stabilizations or doing something else. But every time I would get a stabilized version back to test it, it actually was showing quite a bit of movement. So I knew something was like kind of up, and what was up was two things. One, that auto update reference was being checked on, and two, that they weren't using the perspective grid at all. So in this particular case, I would say that's a huge problem, just for being able to check your work, if for no other reason. So I'm still going to leave everything else set up exactly the same. There is, we're going to use this garbage mask for our perspective grid. I might have to redraw it, but it's going to be the same idea. We're going to use that garbage mask to do the tracking. The only difference is we're going to use the perspective grid. Oops. Certainly don't need two perspective grids. We're going to use the perspective grid as just kind of our a way to kind of invert the track, check it, and whether we use it in like a 2D mode or we stay with it as a 3D kind of surface plane for us to kind of attach to is really up to you. But I think the way that we're going to get the data is going to be more beneficial. So I've got the perspective grid. I'm now going to draw a garbage mask, so it's going to be very similar to what we did. And you don't have to do it this way. You can actually use, obviously, the perspective grid as your surface, but if you are just trying to be hell-bent on the way that you were doing it previously, then this will work out for you as well. We're going to go to tracking. I'm going to track backwards. We're going to keep auto update reference off. I'm going to snap just to show you what it sees. Right now, it's just going to see the actual perspective grid bounding box. But what we want is to just use the garbage mask as our tracking source. It looks almost identical because they were so similar. And then we also want to exclude the garbage mask that we did for the roto. So now we're just going to analyze backwards with those same occlusions. And what you'll see now, if we parent our clip, our background to the perspective grid, hide everything else, go into 2D mode and invert the track, you're now going to see the stabilized version. So this would be the telltale sign to see if my track is in fact working, because I'll watch it, I'll be like, oh, looks like a Photoshop comp. I could even start to go in and just actually, I could work this way. So, you know, there's really no reason why I can't just bring in my surface. Oops. And line it up as if it's a Photoshop comp, you know, do whatever I need to do to get it in place, and then invert it back as kind of my solve and test. So, you know, now we could kind of just test this thing, see it looks pretty good, and then invert it on down the stream. Well, here, why don't we just do it? So it's going to be our poor man's version. Just duplicate this. Our background has not changed. The only thing that's changed is now we're feeding it this grid. Don't need, let's see, don't need this. Everything else is hidden, so we're gonna pull in our surface. It's going to be parented under our perspective grid, and then we need to re-invert everything. So now I'm going to hide everything, hit play, and there you go. We have a nice opacity change for some reason. Now, the only reason why I'm showing this is, again, because this gives me the opportunity to check the work, and when I need to be able to see if the track is stable and or what is a problem with the track, this inversion method gives me that opportunity. If you skip that step, totally fine if you're able to kind of do it under one of these methods, but just be prepared to be able to kind of be able to show your work if needed and or correct it on the fly. And I think it's just maybe a little bit easier when you're able to kind of do it in a way that lets us invert the move and then reapply it at a later time. So that's kind of the PSA for today. I hope that this has shed some light if you were doing it a different way, and or if you just wanted an alternative. Just know that the perspective grid is always going to be a way that is applicable even if you don't want to use the perspective grid itself. You can always use your garbage mass to kind of obtain the data. Obviously, the one caveat, and this should be fairly obvious, is that the perspective grid and planar tracking really is that, and it really does need a surface that's on the same plane. So, having this doesn't quite work. Having two surfaces on the same plane works really well, and you should be able to grab your track from any one of those places on the plate and get the same data applied as long as it's on the same planar surface. So thanks for watching. Hope this helps, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.